driven technology that transform the way our clients envision and shape their businesses. And we are really one of the key players in the region in the space of data and analytics. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So why Fusion for data? We have really three core areas that strengthen our ability to partner with our customers. The first is we have a broad breadth of delivery capability in the data space. We've got a very sizable data practice across our three regional offices, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Columbus. And we are a soup-to-nuts data practitioner. We have strategic data management offerings as well as tactical build and delivery. We support traditional business intelligence and relational data warehousing applications as well as big data and data science related type applications. So we go deep, and we provide really a one-stop shop for working on solutions that really drive value to the business. And we work with a lot of different technology platforms. I'm going to introduce Andrew Bitterman here shortly. He'll share a little bit about that. So Fusion is really the leading full-service data and analytics solution provider in Indiana and Ohio. And our focus is really to help our clients drive visible impact on their top and bottom lines. And that's really all I want to share with you about us. Our partnership with Podium helps us accelerate to that value. And so what I want to do now is go ahead and introduce our data practice director, Andrew Bitterman, and let him share a little bit more with you and get the demo started. Andrew?
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Bitterman. As Mark indicated, I am the Fusion Alliance Data Practice Director. Fusion is very selective about with whom we partner to extend our capabilities. In the data lake management space, Podium is our go-to partner, and as such, we're very excited to have them here today. I want to hand things over to Paul Barth, CEO of Podium Data, to do an overview of the platform, and we'll follow that up with a technical demo. Paul?
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew and Mark. It's a great overview. And one of the things I like is that you're leading really with the business results. It's not leading with technology. It's about outcomes. And to that end, I'd like to just set up what you're going to see in terms of a live demo with a set of case studies and some overview of how we view data lakes and data lake management and what's critical for success. So one of the things I'm very proud of is that our product has been in production for a few years at different customers, large Fortune 100 scale customers. And these are actual results and quotes that we have gotten and they've spoken about publicly. So 2 years ago, we started working with Chad Dow at Astellas Pharmaceuticals. It's a top 20 pharma globally. And they were looking for ways to accelerate and improve their analytics through self-service access to data. And when they selected Podium, they realized that they could use the Hadoop technology to minimize their costs while getting self-service access and controls. And the result is that in the past 18 months, they dramatically accelerated their ability to deliver analytics to the business. It used to take an analyst on average 3 months to do an analysis, and most of that time, as I'll show you, was spent gathering and preparing data. Because the data is all pre-staged on a Podium managed data lake, and Podium allows you to discover and organize and prepare your data for analysis. Today, on average, the turnaround time is 2 days. It means management can come to them on a Monday and know that by Wednesday they'll have some insights on strategic questions. It means that instead of doing 20 or 30 analyses a year about their business, about their markets, about their processes, they're doing hundreds and hundreds. So they're becoming a much more analytic business because of Podium's capabilities and their ability to leverage it in their analytic groups. On the other side, we have IT sponsors who are seeing the power of the data lake concept. And we've been working with TD Bank for over 2 years. They have Podium in production, delivering data as a service. And although analytics is one of their user communities, there are system-to-system flows and consolidations taking place. And these consolidations are driving what they have budgeted a 40% reduction in data-related costs in their enterprise, as well as accelerated delivery of data-related projects to the business. And this is at a corporate enterprise scale. It's not a small group. So we are seeing this transition. You see some of the logos of our other customers, and that list is growing very rapidly. And let me tell you a little bit about why we think this change is so effective. The first is that we believe we're introducing a new concept. We don't really like the term data lake. It sounds like a dumping ground. People joke about data swamps. We believe that a healthy data ecosystem is vibrant, it's active, it's engaging, and all the stakeholders participate. We believe it's like a marketplace. And so in this diagram, we're indicating that the sources of data come from many different places. They may come from internal systems, but also third parties and increasingly devices in the IoT world. And they're consumed by many constituents, not just knowledge workers, but enterprise systems themselves and algorithms out in the IoT world. And for this to be sustainable and scalable and agile, the data management paradigm has to evolve from a long supply chain with lots of engineering into a dynamic interactive marketplace. And in this world, the producers of data are providing data, the raw data in its raw format at its complete comprehensive data set. So it's no longer writing selective extract statements and code to get data out of systems. It's provisioning all the data. And the reason this is so important is because what we have learned about data is you don't know what you don't know. We don't know whether fields that you include from a relational database that are not needed for a profitability analysis today might be useful for customer service in the future. So the new model is to provision all the data. Hadoop economics makes that affordable, and to use the structure that comes from those source systems about data structures, tables, definitions, formats, types, but not a lot of transformation of that data as it goes into the lake. And we call that the bronze layer. It's raw data, it's historical, and it's an asset that's accessible to create better quality of data. And you'll see that we've depicted that with the terminology silver and gold, and that's partially where we got our name Podium from, of bronze, silver, and gold, where the silver and gold data sets are prepared in some way. Gold data is what you would typically think of as a warehouse quality, highly organized, conformed, quality controlled data set that's safe for consumption by a wide variety of users. But we know there's an unmet need for tailored data sets. These are data sets that may be new, they may be additional, and you're not sure of the quality, and their usage might be for a narrow set of data scientists. And in fact, these data sets are part of the natural evolution of data in its life cycle. And what we're enabling with an interactive self-service data lake is that knowledge workers can go into the lake, draw on bronze, silver, and gold data, and improve it and create new data sets. So in a sense, the consumers of data who are shopping for data and driving the needs of their needs selectively in the data lake are also improving and enhancing the data lake. And they become producers of data themselves. And this to me is the virtuous cycle that we're now enabling, where it's no longer the handoff back and forth between IT and business users and long waits of weeks or months to get data ready, but really it's at your fingertips. And that's really what has enabled companies like Astellas to rapidly migrate from traditional warehousing platforms onto the data lake managed by Podium and get those spectacular analytic results. This is just a diagram of the product to orient you that as Bob shows you how Podium works, this is really the logical organization. Podium is a data management application. It is a subscription software product, and it's a turnkey installation. It is one application that you install on a Linux server, typically an edge node in a Hadoop cluster, and we manage the data flows in and out and the data processing on the cluster. We don't provision or modify any of the Hadoop clusters, and in fact, we're certified with the major distributions as depicted below, and we are expanding that list of things like EMR going forward. What you're also seeing here is the functionality and some key internal design principles that make us successful in large enterprises. At the top level, we manage end-to-end the data management process that we like to call the first mile of data. From bringing data in from a source of data, from a variety of formats. We recognize that we're in legacy environments that have COBOL and have XML files and other data sets that are hard to query with traditional tools to organize, bring that data in, landing it on the cluster. Note that we're not bringing data through this edge node. It's just organizing a parallel transfer into the cluster. organizing the data, and it's also doing validation, encryption, and profiling on the way in to protect the data and make it ready to use on the cluster. All of the information about that load, where it came from, what the quality statistics were, what the data profiling results were, are stored in our metadata repository, which Bob will show you can display attributes about the data that you may or may not understand. So if you are trying to understand which fields are good and you see some fields that are not populated or they have corrupt data in them, Podium can help you understand that data, and then with our discovery screens, you can make your own annotations, and you can also put data into a shopping cart. And in the shopping cart, you can choose to say, well, you know what, I'm going to combine a few of the data sets that I have and prepare them in an interactive screen that really requires no programming, so that you can work in this environment and create a new data set out of what's already there, out of your shopping cart. And when you check out, that new data set is also stored down on the cluster and registered with HCatalog and registered in our metadata. And all the lineage is managed and tracked. So the management of this environment really lets you see the whole evolution and life cycle of data as it comes in from bronze, silver to gold. And we've also put in a really rich set of security mechanisms that you will find in most enterprises. So integration with Active Directory and Kerberos, integration with Sentry and Ranger on the Hadoop clusters, protection not only down to a table level, but down to an individual field level with obfuscation and encryption algorithms that run massively parallel. They're very efficient, and they allow this data asset to be very large and broad, but protected so that only those users registered to access and work with that data can see it. Most recently, we created a new module called Publish, because we realized the data lake is not the only data environment people are going to work with. And this allows a shopper to take the contents of their cart and set up a regular distribution of that data to downstream systems. And when you're distributing data, this is not just moving a file. All the rich metadata we've collected about business definitions and technical formats and quality can be shipped and packaged along with that onto another Hadoop cluster, into a relational database, into flat files, all, of course, under a governance and permission-based control system, so that you really have a good lineage over the data coming into the system to the data going out of the system. And lastly, we've kept the system very open. You're going to see our GUI, which I think is very intuitive. It's very easy to learn how to use things. You don't have to be a programmer to start creating and working with data on Hadoop and generating new data with new business logic. But many organizations have existing enterprise processes that are automated. So we have a services interface, a RESTful API, that governs and controls our entire application. So any enterprise using Podium can query the Podium server through these services, find out the status of data loading, kick off loads and prepare jobs. They can find out about user capabilities and access. They can read the metadata, for example, to exchange it with another governance or metadata tool. And it keeps the system very open and flexible and easy to integrate with. This capability, this turnkey capability, allowed Astellas to install Podium and be up and running in production in 90 days. And they started with kind of 5 terabytes. They pulled off of Netezza, then they brought in some external data, grew it to 50, and now they're up to over 200 terabytes of data, well over 100 users of the system, and the system feeding downstream BI applications and analytics and machine learning kinds of algorithms. What I thought was interesting was when Chad told us the acceleration that they'd achieved, the 3 months down to 2 days, it was achieved not through changing their business process. They didn't get rid of a step of analysis. Analysis always requires gathering data, preparing data, doing an initial analysis, and then finding out that they'd asked the wrong question, gotten the wrong data, or they had a different question they wanted to go after, a different technique, which would generally require an iteration, another fetching of the data, preparing it, and analyzing it. So this is a kind of an example workflow. And the difference is when you do this in Podium, instead of weeks of gathering data, if it's not already in a warehouse, for example, if you need to bring it from multiple sources, that often will take days or weeks to get that data. All the data in their environment is provisioned onto Podium. You're simply browsing and putting it in a shopping cart. You're then preparing it using the tools that we provide. and then doing your analysis against that data either on Hadoop or on an adjacent analytics cluster. And if you find out you need to redo it, you go back into Podium. You can even load data very efficiently. And in fact, he and his team will load data themselves without having to go and ask a programmer to do the load for them. And Podium can guide them through the security and through the formatting issues through wizards to make that very easy. So this is a kind of process efficiency when you take the delays and difficulties out of preparing data that can result in that kind of dramatic improvement on analytics. The other thing that we addressed from the start with Podium that I think is very relevant to the Fusion customers is that building a data lake comes with attendant risks. And the risks that were outlined by Gartner over a year ago led to this very bold statement by them, which was by 2018, next year, 90% of the deployed data lakes will be useless. The reason they said they'll be useless is that the data lakes we envisioned actually started to become data swamps. They were data swamps because of security, because they may have applications and data on a Hadoop cluster, but they don't have the access controls to safely allow end users or other applications to use that data. There's also questions about quality and meaning. There's a very strong message out there about what's called schema on read, that we don't really need to structure the data to load it, which is true, but ignoring structure brings enormous perils. And in fact, by applying this schema or the view of the data only when you read it or query it, you end up with both optimization and performance problems, but more important, quality problems. You can have errors in the data, you can have structural problems that cause the results to be wrong, but your Hive job, your Pig job, your Spark job doesn't tell you there's an error in the data. And that may be okay if you're a .com company, but if you're a bank or insurance company, pharmaceutical company, that's not okay. So Podium built in automated data quality and profiling and uses schemas in ways that Bob will show you to organize the data and let you know the quality on every field, on every load. The third is organization, and this is your ability to find and understand the right data for your needs. And our customers now have tens of thousands of tables of data loaded on their data clusters. And so if it's not organized, it could be very easily, a user could be working with the wrong data. So everything from our groups definitions and access controls through tagging, search capabilities, data retention, we can, someone logs into Podium and they're not searching directories hoping they can figure out what data is where and what's the appropriate data for my meaning. And we've done a lot of work transforming this beyond to the next risk factor, which is governance, which is your ability to put policy information into the metadata to drive access restrictions, to drive protection of data, to drive appropriate use. And this is made possible because we built a metadata system that's extensible so that you can create your own properties that drive your own business processes to monitor and manage everything from data retention through data access through data encryption and obfuscation down at the field level. And of course, the fifth is the skills gap, which is if you don't have skill, if you have to be a Hadoop programmer to use the data lake, you're not going to get broad adoption. So as you'll see, our no code programming environment and data preparation is going to addresses that and allows many classes of users to log into the data lake and shop for their data and prepare it. And the last thing I'll say is that there's a lot of noise in the data lake space these days. And a lot of the people building lakes are looking at pure open source solutions. They're looking at commercial solutions. And I think what differentiates Podium is that we designed this with one business process in mind. That we're not going to be doing analytics, we're going to be doing data management and data preparation. And that means that we are managing a repository. We enrich what we know about the usage of that data and quality of data every time somebody touches it. And it's all consistently and simply managed in one metadata repository. And the contrast or the different approach to that would be to bring tools that have the functionality you're going to see today that Bob's going to show you and integrate them which would result in a lengthy systems integration, but moreover, I would say a fragile solution over time. Because the key in this whole data end-to-end process is sharing the metadata and enriching it and having it in one common place. So the fact is that we can stand up a database, a data lake in a day, and you can begin getting the benefits of it immediately, whether it's on premises or in the cloud. So I think I'm going to stop there and hand it over to Bob.
All right, great. Thanks, Paul. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into showing Podium. And what we'll do is we're going to touch on a couple of what we call personas in Podium, a day in the life of a Podium user, such that everybody can get a sense of what Podium is and really tie in a lot of the points that Paul talked about into seeing Podium. So what we will focus on here is really out of the several personas that we see our customers driving Podium with, we're going to focus on that producer persona that Paul mentioned, the consumer persona, as well as talk a little bit about security and kind of give the notion of what you can see can be managed from a secure perspective. So Podium is a web-based interface, as you see here. When you log in, whether you're a producer or consumer, you're thrown into what we call our recent load dashboard screen. And again, if you think through the concept of a data marketplace, as a user in Podium, when you log in, it's great to see what's been loaded recently, within the last 24 hours, within the last 5 minutes, and understand what that is. And you can see from a Podium perspective, we've got a notion of a source and an entity, which is equivalent in kind of the old school enterprise terms of database and table. Also, you get to see from a very snapshot perspective how many records were loaded and were there any bad records or ugly records. And this gives the user a sense of the quality of that data kind of right up front. So you know, kind of very quick view of that. So what we'll do is the slide you saw a couple of minutes ago that shows the different components that are critical to the successful marketplace, including the sourcing component. And this is essentially where the producer lives, and we're going to start here and then go on to the consumer who lives in the Discover section of Podium. We'll also show some self-service prepare options, and if we have time, talk about and show some publish options as well. And then finally, from a security persona, we'll show some of the reports and lineage reports that Podium gives you. So let's go ahead and focus on that producer persona for a minute. So in the spirit of time, we've pre-ingested some data, but I am going to walk you through onboarding data. So, you know, Paul talked a lot about the use cases of kind of speeding up as well as self-service. So remember that our our customers that are in production, they are in production in a turn the crank mode, right? Loading data every day, loading data intraday. So everything you see through this UI, just kind of envision that it is enterprise scale and it is prepared and ready to run every day. Hooking into job flow, workflow, scheduling systems. Okay, so that's actually an important context to have. So you can see a couple of things. I'm going to onboard some data. Within Podium, we classify data differently because no matter what we're onboarding, whether it's flat file data, whether it's hierarchical data such as XML or connecting to a database or even complex mainframe data sources, the end result of Podium's ingestion and onboarding is a fully validated, profiled, what we call canonical data set. So it is immediately queryable, where you'll see in other kind of, I guess what I'll say, ill-formed data lakes, people are taking XML data and throwing it on the lake as XML, and it becomes very difficult to query because you're going to write some custom code to actually get that in a form. For Podium, we actually do all that hard work for you. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and very quickly onboard an XML source. This is a real XML data set, and I'll call this my Fusion Podium XML data set. And just to show you the kind of self-service aspect of this, we can put that data set or source in a hierarchy, which is just a simple organization structure, and maybe I'll just call it webinar. Now we have several ways to get the data, S3, local, etc., and we'll continue down this path. Simple wizard. Where is the data set located? So I'll go ahead and tell it. Now, this is an important aspect that you must kind of understand. So the whole concept Paul talks about schemas, Podium needs to understand the data, the structure of that data, such that it can do all that heavy lifting under the covers. So for example, with a mainframe, you may have a COBOL copybook. That's what Podium will read and parse the data. For an XML, you may have an XSD, or we can generate an XSD. And that just tells Podium a little bit about that file. And what you'll see here is, as we give it the XSD information, that's really all we need to do. And the process that we're going through right now, by the way, is just onboarding the metadata about that. So that's an object in Podium. From a security perspective, you can see the red asterisk there. We require you to tie that to a group or set of groups. So now very quickly you can see from that schema definition of this XML file, we have found a bunch of different types of records. And this is actual master data management file from a third-party vendor that produces XML representation of those things. So you can see there's person, party, address, data there. So you also have the ability to say, hey, give me all of that or some of that. Obviously, all of that is the kind of selected path that we're going to go down right now. We'll continue down this path. You can even define at a field level what I want to bring in. So I'm going to quickly go through this. And then lastly, before we save this, within Podium, you can tell Podium how do we want to store that data in the marketplace. Our default is a tab text delimited canonical format, but as you can see, we support binary format supported by Hadoop as well. So I'll go ahead and hit finish. And what I just did as a user was I onboarded the metadata about an XML data set, and we're saving that off to the metadata database. And if I go ahead and sort on time, so I have all this flexibility of looking at things how I want to, you can see we now have this new source we created. And very quickly, you can drive down into the entities, you can see all the entities, and you can go ahead and ingest those. In fact, my last step here is I'm going to select all of these and just say go ahead and load that data. So from self-service perspective, I just onboarded some very complex data here, and I am ingesting it. The end result of this data onboarding and ingestion, which will finish in about a minute, is I now have very easily queryable, canonicalized records from XML. So this is the day in the life of a data producer. Also, the results of this are going to be whether I have good data, bad data, or ugly data, which is important. So we're going to go ahead and let that run. And I'm going to hop over to a couple of other data sets just to show you some kind of neat details. So if I click on source again, I am a data producer, I can go ahead and look at some ingest that we see. And you can also see that within Podium, the metadata of Podium, we just onboarded a bunch of technical metadata, really is a first-class citizen. We can't do anything with the data unless we have metadata. So you've got the technical metadata that's critically important. You also have business metadata. So you can see we've got descriptions, names that can be highly interactive. A user can actually go in here and interact directly with this. From a governance perspective, they can change this data, and I'll just kind of give you a quick show of that. You can tag that data. You can set up tag definitions that need to be adhered to. All of that makes it searchable within our global search UI. So what's really nice here is you have the metadata sitting side by side with the actual data, and you're going to see that over in Discover, which is a pretty neat thing. So lastly, from the day in the life of a producer here, we're going to actually show you some results. So in fact, what I'll do is I'll do a quick search here. I got to get rid of that window. Oh, good. And let's go down to the entities in this guy. And what you'll see is I'm going to actually just select them all and show all of the different load logs. So the details of what we've actually captured during ingest. So let's pick an example of some sales transactions where as a user I pulled these in and I have a bunch of bad records and some ugly records here. And what's really nice is Podium will actually tell you why they are bad, right? So I'll show you one very quick example of the power here is that Podium expected 10 fields but found 12. And if you actually go ahead and look at the record, in this particular case, a very common thing that we see, especially with third-party data, is you may have embedded delimiters within a field, within a description field. In this case, they're double quoted. So now as a producer, I can go in and tell Podium, oh, okay, I see my data here. You can change a simple property in Podium to tell it that there are double quoted fields, and Podium will go ahead and cleanse that. So this is the kind of classic process that a producer is going to go through. All right. So this gives you a really good set of kind of details there. Now let's hop over to Discover. So day in the life of producer, I've brought on data. Now I'm over in Discover. So over in Discover, again, you see that same richness in the UI. In fact, it looks very similar to the producer side by design, so it's a very consistent interface. So now the difference you're going to see here is we now have the ability to actually start looking at data and doing things with data. So I'm going to keep picking on these transactions in UPCS codes. So let's go ahead and take this transaction, and very simple things I can do. Very simple concept here. I can look at sample data. So it's always important from a data user perspective to say, hey, is this really the data I kind of want to start playing with? And again, it's all available via the search. Additionally, you can drill down to the field level. We've been playing at the entity level so far. So if I go down to the field level, so first of all, again, you can see that this is governed pretty well. We've got a lot of good business descriptions. I've got fields with household ID, sales, units, transactions, etc. And within the UI, you can see that Podium has also fully profiled this data as a part of ingest. You can see we have minimum values, maximum values, how many nulls did we find, what is the percentage of nulls, as well as the cardinality, what is the uniqueness of the column. So that becomes actually pretty important, again, as a user who's looking for certain pieces of data. The other thing that we provide as a part of that profiling is I can pick maybe shop styles and say, hey, what is my distribution of values here? And again, part of that ingest and profiling that you saw me do gives us a nice distribution of values that is all, again, at your fingertips here and selectable. So it's a really good example here of how the data is sitting right next to the metadata, is sitting right next to that rich profiling data, all at that kind of user's fingertips. Okay, so now if I'm a user and I start kind of in the discovery screen, I'm doing searches, I'm finding data, I also have the ability to say, hey, let me kind of select several entities here. So maybe I want to select transactions and UPCs as well as sales data, and go ahead and add that to a shopping cart. So from a consumer perspective, I'm starting to kind of look at and play with data and want to take actions on data. So now that I've found the data I want, I have my own kind of namespace of data. I can do several things with that data. I can create a customized data set, which in our terminology is a logical grouping of that data. So maybe next time I come into Podium, I don't want to have to do all those searches again. I just found the things that I wanted, and I want to just do that to it every single time, so I can go to that custom created data set. I can publish that data. As Paul mentioned on publish, this is a really neat feature that allows you to take that data and push it out maybe to a SAS cluster or an R cluster or a database. And publish has this really neat feature where you can also decide that you want to, from a security perspective, obfuscate or encrypt data on the way out. So you've got this secure cluster, this secure marketplace, but if it ever leaves the cluster, you can tell Podium, make sure you obfuscate that every time it leaves the cluster. Data Explorer, this gives you an interactive query interface where you can actually run queries kind of in real time. And then Prepare. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into Prepare very quickly here just to show you. Prepare will allow a user to create self-service transformations. So the nice thing about Prepare is it is a data flow interface, very easy to use. You can kind of line these guys up, and I'm going to show you one that we created in about 10 or 15 minutes previously, so we don't have to spend the time doing it here. But some nice things here I want to show you is you have the ability to, the same data that's next to the metadata in Discover is also available within Prepare. So if you're like me and have spent lots of time doing data transformations in the past, the ability to have this data available right at your fingertips while you're creating transformations is pretty powerful, right? So you can cut and paste, you can look at that data. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue on this data consumer self-service Prepare and go into an existing workflow that we already created. So let's go ahead into this existing workflow. And you'll see here, there are a lot of components here. There's lots of things going on. And I'm just going to walk you through it, what we're doing. Again, this took about 10 or 15 minutes to create. And you can see that Podium has several pretty easy to use components here. We've got a transformation component. So this transformation, for example, is going to maybe skinny down the records. I don't want all the columns in my final data set. So there's several things you can do within transformation. You can also select all your standard transforms that you would think about in a very familiar interface, where in this case we're actually flipping a value to a string. You can see this tremendous amount of date functionality, as well as replacing values, but a very flexible interface here. So as you continue down the data flow, you can see that I can then take that transformed data set and join it with, so I'm joining my sales with my UPC codes here. We're able to create a unified data set. We're then, again, adding another transformation there, adding stores to the data, to this flow, ultimately bringing it to what we call a router, a very common thing where you might want to take aggregated data, which we're going to aggregate in the next step, as well as detailed data, and put them side by side. So that aggregated data in this example is going to create a simple aggregated data set that is grouping by all the columns and summing up sales transactions in units. Again, kind of self-service, creating my own data set here, and then finally writing out sales detail and sales aggregation. This is a good example of creating that silver or gold data set that you want to make accessible through Podium, or you could take this data set and publish it out. So we have really, basically in about 20 minutes, which is the usual kind of time frame here, we've onboarded several data sets from varying levels of complexity. We've discovered those data sets in our governed discovery area, and we've created a customized Prepare workflow that has taken all of these kind of disparate files, whether it's an XML file joining to a mainframe file, joining to a CSV file, and created a very rationalized data set that can then be, again, published out to another target, or you can actually, on the cluster, connect tools like Tableau and other BI tools directly to these data sets that Podium has actually created out here.
And this can interactively be run.
And so Podium supports on the cluster. From this interface, you can go ahead and execute this workflow, and you can run it in several engines. So I'm not going to bore everybody with the engines, but we support all the standard engines in Hadoop. More importantly, I think, you can also set this up, and this is what our customers do. This is an enterprise scale set of transformations, right? This is not a lightweight wrangling tool. This really is now runnable in production every day, every night, multiple times a day through a workflow scheduler, through our command line interface or API. So while we have this really neat interface, we see our customers creating these jobs, moving them from dev to prod, and then running them every day in production. So a very important distinction when comparing kind of the lightweight wrangling versus the enterprise scale transformation that we're showing here. Okay? So flipping over the persona for a minute to the security persona. I may be a security person who wants to know who has access to what data and where is that data being used. So Podium has this reporting interface, and it is not a BI reporting. It is really strictly built into our metadata, where we have several canned reports, basically driven from our customers, but you also have the ability to register your own reports and customize those reports. So let's hop over to a security report, just to kind of give you a flavor of what this looks like. I can define in here, and in fact, let me only select one user, let me select a user that, maybe I want to see what C. Ortega has access to. And I can go ahead and run that report. And what that's telling me in a very kind of quick way is all of the objects within the marketplace or within Podium that C. Ortega is accessing. Okay, so pretty powerful security interface there. I can also see let's go ahead and take a look at our lineage. So we've been playing with this kind of sales data. Let me go ahead and actually select that. And it'll give you a really good sense of, let's see, we've been playing with sales transactions. So where are the sales transactions being used within the lake? So this report will actually give you a full end-to-end view from ingest through any publishing or any prepared jobs, for example, that prepared job that we were just showing you, where that data actually shows up. And this, again, becomes critical if you want to have an understanding of, well, if I actually change this data source, or if I go ahead and actually delete this data source, what is the impact? So there's a nice, easy impact analysis, as you can see from this UI. Scroll over a little bit, you can see that we've gone from an ingest of that data, and there's actually, and I actually didn't even know this, that it is actually used in 2 different prepared jobs. And again, that gives you a really nice view of that end-to-end lineage. So we've really gone through in about the 15 minutes here, onboarding data from a producer perspective. We took some complex XML, we rationalized that data out, and it becomes immediately queryable. We went in the consumer discover screen, we searched for some data, we found some data, we looked at all the profiling data, we added that data into prepare, we showed the prepare job that can then be executed and create these detailed data sets, these aggregated data sets, and finally showed the security persona of being able to see how that data is used, who has access to that data, and again, that is all controlled within Podium. So with that, we've about 15 minutes left. I don't know if we want to open things up for questions. Barb, what do you think? Yes? Are we at a point where we want to? Good. All right.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. So yeah, let's move into a different mode. Let's get into Q&A mode. First question we have posted out here is asking regarding sources, what about document structures like JSON?
So document sources like JSON, so it's very similar to XML in terms of ingestion. And what we're finding, though, that's interesting is these transformations that flatten NoSQL data structures like XML and JSON into more relational tables are really familiar structures for the business. So one of the things that Bob didn't mention on that transformation is that XML has a hierarchical record structure just like JSON. So when you normalize it, you actually have to generate the keys. And we give the users controls as to what they use for keys to join the data together. And that means that these hierarchical structures don't require, if you're using Podium, a NoSQL database or learning NoSQL query languages, to query them. And so that kind of translation, and what's interesting for this also is it goes way back to legacy systems such as COBOL data sources, which we have expertise in. Those are, again, hierarchical record format structures. We normalize them. They also have complexities like not just occurs, but redefines. That's a common that you would send multiple record types in a single file. You'd have intelligent headers and trailers. And Podium uses all of that for validation and structuring a good relational schema out of those hierarchical structures.
Okay, great. Next question around self-service. There are a lot of different vendors right now promoting their solution as the right way to stand up a data lake. What are some of the considerations and factors that might suggest which approach is right for a given project?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we believe that the integrated approach is best for large organizations with complex data requirements that are continuously changing. And so, there are some companies, just to give an example, that are only online. They don't have a wide variety of data, and it doesn't change very often, and they have some expert data scientists. And I think some of the wrangling tools that Bob mentioned, or some of the even programming tools for them, the open source tools, will be sufficient for them. But their data lake would be really for a small community of expert users. The platforms like Podium, which are really enterprise scale, are oriented for two things. One is a really high degree of automation and robustness for enterprise standards. So that's integration with Active Directory and security integration and metadata exposure, usage analysis and monitoring, and controls for lights out processing. It's not just the interaction and creating things on a self-service. And we believe that security and self-service go hand in hand. So a wrangling tool that doesn't have very robust enterprise security controls, you could not unleash in an enterprise. So that's where I would say, depending on whether you're more of a small shop or focused only on a small, highly skilled analytic community, or whether you're really trying to democratize data with this marketplace idea, would lead you towards a platform like ours.
Okay, thanks. Next question. Why wouldn't you just build a data marketplace from scratch using open source Hadoop and associated Apache projects?
So this is Bob. Great question. So some of our best customers, in fact, tried that approach, and you can only learn from our experience. And the challenges that they face, and these are large organizations that had significant resources, really center around what we talked about during the demo, what Paul talked about, which is data validation. Doing data validation and doing data profiling such that the data is business ready is one of the core tenets of success, and also one of the core tenets of failure, frankly. And this is one of the things that Podium has actually built our foundation on. So certainly it's possible, but the dangers and the challenges and frankly the cost people will find are going to be far more expensive than actually incorporating an enterprise solution, such as Podium. And I mentioned one thing, business-ready data, but we've also seen places that have done an okay job at data ingestion, but that they don't have the governance or discovery piece around it. So trying to figure out actually how to find that data and do something with the data is also something that often kind of goes by the boards or forgotten, because when you're building it on your own, it becomes a technical exercise, not a business exercise.
And I'll just add one thing. This is Paul. Sometimes companies are faced with a false choice. They're thinking, well, if I buy a commercial product like Podium, I'm going to be locked into one vendor, and so I'm going to go open source and build it myself. And one of the things that we're very proud of is that our entire system is open and accessible and standard. So, the data flow that you saw Bob build is generating Hadoop native code as an explicit object that you can run even if you turn off Podium, right? So it's not a dependency. It uses standard file formats, standard directory structure, standard security frameworks. So if you built a data lake with Podium and you decided to go and use something else or go open source later, you literally would not have to do a thing to the data lake, and the metadata that we store inside of our metadata repository is 100% accessible through our APIs. So you can even suck out all the business definitions, all the lineage, all the information that Podium has in it, and you could put it in something else. So we like to think of this as we allow a company that doesn't have an army of Hadoop programmers to get up and running and delivering value extremely quickly, but keep you out of being locked into a specific vendor.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. Next question. Do you see any patterns developing the types of use cases driving successful data lake projects?
So from a pattern perspective, again, it drives what we see is the what I'll call the acceleration. So the business needing the acceleration of data, kind of in the touch it once, take it all mantra. So getting access to the data as soon as they can is absolutely one of the biggest drivers here. The other piece here is really the promise of the concept of self-service, right? So not putting the data And what we like to say is being very presumptuous about that format of the data in some enterprise normalized data model in which it's hard to query. So the users driving this are really saying, I just need the data in the format I want the data in. And having that kind of self-service driver, as well as the kind of accelerated view of getting the data out there as quick as possible. And then the third peg of that we really see a lot is governance is driving a lot of this, right? So the promise of having the data in one place that's business ready, that's fast, being able to be governed by this kind of, Podium-like interface where you have that metadata business driver sitting right next to the data is an extremely compelling story.
I'd also say that business units that have traditional analytics requirements, so actuarial, marketing, sales analytics, excuse me, supply chain optimization, they like this approach because it's constantly evolving what they're optimizing for, and the data sources are growing. So I think, you may be a candidate for this if you're, facing a big refresh of an expensive warehouse with lots of new data sources. That would be one. Another case that we've found interesting is we've actually had some companies that are acquiring other companies, and they have to bring in all their data and build it out for and map it into their standards, and so they're using Podium to normalize and integrate. And then leading companies who are really trying to do what Astellas is trying to do, saying we are going to use analytics as a core strategic competitive advantage, and we need to be much more agile, and so we need it to be broader and more democratized. And so if you have leaders in any of these roles, chief data officers, CIOs, heads of marketing or finance, who have that vision, I think that you can identify some early wins, and then you can scale to populate this over time.
Okay. Great. We're almost out of time, so let's do one more question. Let's try to do a 2 to 3 minute answer. This is interesting. So we talked about Gartner talking about 90% of data lakes being unusable. So this question is around data swamps. Can a data swamp be converted into an enterprise data marketplace?
I think that's one of the things that we thought hard about when we started, because we knew that people were building these custom databases by themselves. So a couple of our leading customers, TD Bank and Cigna, for example, started out with a homegrown data lake that was only usable by a few experts. When we came in, one of the nice things there is that we talk about ingesting the data, bringing in the data from sources. Well, the data source can be a file that's already on Hadoop. So if you already have 1,000 or 10,000 files that you've been loading in your course of work, and you want to now get it under management, Podium can point at that and start managing it directly. So we do believe that you can start managing and governing something that is not well structured today. One of the financial use cases for one of our customers was really deduplicating data that's already on their cluster, because I think they had like 25 different groups doing projects on their clusters, and each of them had their own directories and their own copies of the data. And many of them were working with either claims data or transactions data that were very large, but they were duplicated and slightly different, which is what always happens with analytical teams. And this was a way of consolidating, simplifying, and securing that asset.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, we're about out of time. So a couple of things. So one, I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But thank you for attending. We're going to post additional questions that we did not get to in our forum. We have our Fusion Alliance Data Executives community group, so we're going to post a link to that below. So the answers to the questions will be there. If you have questions, engage that group. That group is designed specifically to engage data executives, managers, experts to share their expertise, ideas, discuss business challenges, data solutions, and provide and share insights there. So that's a great group to be a part of. Lastly, if you do have questions that didn't get answered, you can also feel free to contact any of the speakers today, and we will get back to you. So with that, I think we're done. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.